I'm glad you came. She's been asking for you. Mary's father greeted Jack as he entered the house. She should be awake now. The doctor said she doesn't have much time. Jack entered Mary's room to see the young girl lying in her bed. Her mother was sitting in the chair next to her, cradling her little hand with both of hers, tears rolling down her cheek. "Is that you, Mr. Jack? I thought I heard you." The young Mary's voice straining. She looked to the direction of the door, her eyes grey and unclear like a cloud during a storm. "I've been waiting for you. Tell me again about the ocean." Mary had been born with a degenerative disease which had robbed her of her sight at a young age and made her body weak. She had not experienced much of the outside world, for her condition had left her bedridden for most of her life. The only real connection she had with the outside world was through Jack's tales of the sea. "What did you see this time?" Mary asked excitedly as she lay in her bed. Jack was a travelling fisherman with a hardened expression, his brown hair coated in sea salt and his skin bronze and firm like leather. Jack would travel to all different docks to sell his catch as he had no real home to return to. Lately, however, he found himself stopping at one specific dock to tell stories to one specific little girl. Mary had always loved the ocean. She loved hearing about Jack's sailing adventures. She would imagine herself on the ship with him, the spray of the sea against her cheek and the howling wind through her hair. Jack told Mary about his latest escapades on the sea, as he had done so many times before. As Jack was recounting his experiences, Mary showed her usual love and enthusiastic focus towards him. "Oh, please take me with you next time, Mr. Jack," Mary pleaded after Jack was finished. "I want to go out on the ocean with you. You promise? You promise to take me with you?" Jack was reminded of another promise he had made to her when they first met those 3 years ago. Jack was getting off the dock on his way to the market after a long time at sea. His clothes were dirty and tattered from obvious signs of overuse, and a bag full of fish hung over his left shoulder. "Excuse me, sir, are you a fisherman?" Jack heard a sweet little voice coming from behind him. Jack turned around to see a young girl. He noticed that the little girl's eyes were masked by a grey shadow, like a clear sky interrupted by a wisp of cloud. "Yes, I am, miss," replied Jack. "I'm Mary. What's your name, mister?" Mary asked with a childish curiosity. "I'm Jack. Nice to meet you, Mary," Jack said as he reached out and shook Mary's little hand. "But how could you tell that I was a fisherman?" "I thought I saw you walk off the dock, mister," replied Mary. "I can't see very well, so I had to come closer, and that's when I could smell the fish and seawater on you." "Only a fisherman could smell like that," Mary said, letting out a little laugh at her own cheekiness. "You have a keen sense of smell," Jack replied, not accustomed to speaking to a child. Jack was surprised by the bravery and confidence of this little girl who couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. "Can you tell me what it's like to be out on the ocean, Mr. Jack? I've always wanted to go, but Mummy and Daddy say it's too dangerous," Mary suddenly asked. Jack smiled and nodded in response. "What would you like to know?" Then, in an instant, Jack could see that Mary's face started showing signs of fatigue, like the very act of standing was becoming too much. Everything. Mary's speech suddenly became slower, her words being forcibly uttered through deep and wheezing breaths. Mary suddenly collapsed against Jack. Jack dropped his cargo and scooped her up. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" he asked. "At home. Please take me back," the little girl said in between big, staggered inhales. "It's the house on the corner." As Jack started to walk with Mary, he saw a young couple running through the market towards them. "There she is, thank God," said the man as they reached Jack and Mary, his face wrinkled with worry. "Thank you so much for your help, sir," said the man through thin tears, a sigh of relief escaping him. "We were worried sick," said the woman. From the looks of pain and anxiety on their faces, Jack knew that they were the little girl's parents. "You can't keep running off like that in your condition, Mary," exclaimed the father. "You aren't well enough." The father then faced Jack. "Thank you again, sir. She's always escaping to the docks to be near ships, but, well, she is sick, you see, and she can't handle being out alone anymore." The woman took Mary from Jack's arms, and the couple turned and started walking away. Jack could hear the man and woman murmuring as they walked. Among the unclear voices, Jack noticed the little Mary trying to speak. "Stop," Mary said, fighting through the exhaustion. The couple stopped and both looked down at her. "Mr. Jack, we're going to... tell me about the ocean. Please." The couple shared a glance of compassion for Mary and then turned back to Jack, who had already started down the road. Sir, wait!" shouted the father as he started to run after Jack. Jack, hearing the man's voice, stopped and turned around as the man arrived just behind him. "Sir, would you like to have dinner with us? We are so grateful for what you did for Mary. Please, she would love to hear your stories." "Would you?" the father asked. Jack smiled and nodded in response, picked up his bag and followed the couple to their home. When they entered the house, Mary's mother brought her into her room, lovingly tucked the girl into the small bed and sat in the chair next to her as she had always done, Mary's father kneeling on the other side. "Are you comfortable, honey?" Mary's mother asked, wearing a mother's smile. "Do you need anything?" "I want to hear Mr. Jack's stories," Mary uttered as some of her strength returned. "After you rest," Mary's father responded. Mary's parents left her room and went to Jack, who was waiting by her door. "Please sit down," said the mother to Jack, gesturing at the dining table. "Dinner will be ready soon." The inside of the house was a simple design. Outside of Mary's room was a space being shared by the kitchen and dining table. Next to Mary's room was her parents' room and the house entrance on the far side of the kitchen. Jack felt that despite the plainness of the house, the feeling of love and peace that filled the air made it feel warm and welcoming. Jack took a seat at the small table next to the father, who sat at the head. Soon after, he was handed a bowl of beef soup and a piece of bread. "I'm sorry it is not much. Most of our money goes to Mary's treatment. There is not much left to buy ingredients." "It is very kind of you, thank you," replied Jack, offering a comfortable smile to the apologetic woman. Jack and Mary's parents ate together and spoke about their lives until the sun set. They spoke about how the couple met and how Jack became a fisherman. They spoke about Mary and where they all grew up. The couple were happy and bright, often smiling and laughing, but Jack could see that beneath their optimistic exterior, caring for and worrying about a sick child had taken a toll. Deep wrinkles were imprinted on their faces, and their eyes told a story of relentlessness. Just as Jack had finished his meal, he heard Mary's voice. Mr. Jack, where are you?" "You should go in now, Jack. She's awake and waiting for you," said Mary's father with a kind smile on his face. He gently touched Jack's shoulder. Jack stood up from the table, walked over to Mary's room and opened the door to see the little girl already staring towards him. "I know it's you, Mr. Jack. I can still smell you." Mary let out a giggle. Jack couldn't help but join in. "So, ma'am, what would you like to know?" Jack asked as he sat on the chair next to her bed. "Everything," Mary weakly exclaimed with a tone of anticipation as she sat up on her bed. So Jack told Mary about his latest journey. He told her about the time he faced the raging storm off the coast. He told her about the school of dolphin that he saw through the crystal clear waters. He told her about the smell of the sea, the touch of the air, the sound of the wind. As he recounted his journey and the sea, things that had become almost mundane to him, he was surprised at the level of attention and pure focus Mary showed to his words. While Jack spoke, Mary would stare at him with such intensity and excitement that her grey-tinted eyes seemed to become transparent. the wide, bright smile on her face seeming to fill the air with an optimistic light, which seeped into Jack like water being poured onto thirsty soil. The longer Jack looked into Mary's questioning gaze, the more he felt as if a cloud was being lifted from his inner being, leaving behind a pure, weightless space. The lack of obstruction seeming to birth a renewed positive outlook on his own existence, something that Jack had not experienced for a long time. Jack noticed that the more he was in her presence, the clearer his sight became, almost as if it was he who had been living with clouded vision. Time seemed to flow endlessly as Jack spelled out everything that he had experienced, much to the delight of Mary. Jack spoke until the little Mary drifted off to sleep, her concentration on Jack's story seeming to sap the energy from her little body. With Mary asleep, Jack quietly stood up and returned to the small table where Mary's parents were still sitting. "Thank you for sharing that with her," Mary's father said. "She has always loved the ocean and watching the ships landing at the docks, you see. She loves it so much that she sneaks out to go down there just to be near them. It was fine when she was healthier, but her condition has gotten worse. I've tried to tell her to stop, but nothing I say works. I'm just worried about her, you know." Mary's father whimpered as he let out a defeated sigh, lowering his gaze towards the table. Jack could see the welling of tears in his eyes as Mary's mother placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "I understand," Jack sugaring his words with a compassionate tone as he could see that the situation had an effect on the man. "I am leaving again tomorrow, but would it be alright if I came back here next week and saw Mary?" Jack asked Mary's father. "Oh yes, that would be great. She would love that," Mary's mother overzealously interjected. Mary's father looked up at Jack with an appreciative look plastered on his face. "We can't ask you to go out of your way, but I know that would make Mary very happy. Thank you for your kindness, Jack. You have a good heart." After saying his farewells, Jack stood up from the table and left the small family's home, secretly leaving his bag of fish by the door as his gift to them. 1 week later, Jack saw the little dock approaching on the horizon. That week at sea had been the best Jack had experienced, the calm, clear ocean reflecting an ever-present sun in the cloudless sky above. The sea had blessed Jack. Every time he would drag in his net that week, he would be greeted by a beautiful bounty. Jack found, however, that it was not these conditions that filled his mind, nor the plethora of sea life in his net. It was the sick little girl and the stories that he would tell. As Jack arrived at the village and started walking towards the market, his 2 overflowing bags on his shoulders, he suddenly felt a tugging at the back of his shirt. Mr. Jack, I found you," a familiar little voice uttered from behind him, which Jack could immediately recognise. Without turning around, Jack joked, "Let me guess, it was the smell, right?" Jack turned around to see Mary happily staring at him. "Yep, it's worse than last time," she cheekily replied. Jack smelt his shirt and then exaggeratedly waved his hand in front of his nose. Mary laughed. "How did you know I would be here today?" inquired Jack. "I heard you telling my mummy and daddy," proudly exclaimed Mary. At that moment, Jack could see a man quickly approaching behind Mary, as if trying to catch up with her. "What did I say about waiting for me?" said Mary's father as he arrived. He knelt down and wrapped a blanket around her. "Sorry, Dad, but look, I found him," Mary confidently announced as her father picked her up. "Hello, Jack. Good to see you again," said Mary's father as he shook Jack's hand. "I realised that there was no stopping her now that she had met you, so I told her that she was allowed to come and meet you if we went together." Jack gave Mary a questioning look, but received only a sly smile as a response. "Now that we have found him, we have to go home, remember? No doubt your mother will be worried," Mary's father reminding her of their private promise. "Come on, Mr. Jack," Mary ordered. "Tell me where you went this time." And so, a tradition was born. Every week, Jack would come to that dock, and every time he did, Mary and her father would meet him. The 3 of them would walk together through the crowded markets and along the stone street connecting the village with the world. They would continue until they hit a bend, up 3 stone steps and through the little wooden door of the family's home. Jack would gift the couple with a few fish, and they would share a meal of them together. After Mary woke from her rest, he would tell her stories and she would listen intently, after which Jack would leave to his boat and depart again in the morning. This became Jack's life, and Mary's. This became the only thing that held any meaning to Jack. For the first time in his life, he had a reason for returning. For the first time, he had someone waiting for him to come back. For the first time in his life, the darkness living in his heart gave way to a small, optimistic brightness. Jack finally felt like he belonged. Mary gave Jack a sense of purpose in an aimless existence. She gave him friendship in a life of isolation. Jack was finally content with his life. Until that day. Jack arrived on the dock with a bright heart. He tied up his boat and stood in front of it, waiting for the little girl to find him. But no one came. Jack walked around the market looking for Mary, but he found nothing. Even though countless faces stared at Jack as he searched through the crowded market, he didn't see them. The town seemed dark and abandoned to him as he couldn't find the one face he cared about. The longer he searched, the more worried he became, for she had never missed their meeting. After failing to find her, Jack decided to make his way alone up to the house, darkness slowly creeping into his mind as he walked. Alone he walked through the markets. Alone he walked along the stone street connecting the village with the world, up 3 stone steps and finally arriving at that little wooden door. "Hello, it's Jack," Jack announcing himself as he entered. A few moments later, he saw Mary's father walk out of her room and approach him, his face showing a fight to hold back tears. Dried, watery streaks were displayed down both of his cheeks, and big dark rings could be seen under his eyes. "I'm glad you came," struggled the man. "She's been asking for you." Every word that came out of that man's mouth was sad and slow, like they were being forced through a wall of tar. Jack and Mary's father slowly entered the room. In that instance, Jack saw Mary excitedly sit up on her bed and look towards the door, her smile wide and longing, yearning to hear another of Jack's stories. Once again, her shadowed eyes managing to find Jack and her gaze emitting such a feeling of joy that it filled Jack with hope. Then, suddenly, Jack's mind came into focus and his vision of Mary scattered like wind across the shore, revealing the situation. Mary was lying down with her head towards the ceiling, letting out short, shallow breaths. Her mother was sat in the chair next to the bed, grasping Mary's hand. A look of desperate anguish burrowed deep into her eyes. "Is that you, Mr. Jack? I thought I heard you." Mary's body no longer had the strength to sit up and listen to Jack's words, and she was having trouble focusing on him, as if she was relying on the sound of Jack's voice and also memories of past visits to find him. Jack saw, however, that despite this, she hadn't lost her excited brightness and her wide smile. "He's here, Mary," Mary's father said as a new wave of tears fell down his cheek. Mary's head turned towards the door, but as she did, a bewildered look appeared on her face. "But why can't I smell you, Mr. Jack?" Mary asked, searching for his usual scent in the air. Upon hearing this, a cold despair filled Jack's mind as the speed of her deterioration became all too apparent. "I am here, Mary," Jack uttered with a caring tone as he knelt beside the bed and gently held her other hand. "I've been waiting for you. Tell me again about the ocean." Mary tilted her head towards the ceiling and closed her eyes as the words left her mouth. Even opening her eyes was too much for her now. "After you rest," Jack said to Mary, a single tear falling down Jack's cheek. You promise?" "I promise." But it was a promise that Jack knew he would not be able to keep. No more words were said after that. Mary had to rest. Mary was finally free of that bed, free to explore the oceans that she loved so much. Jack knew that one day he would meet her out there, where he would finally take her sailing with him. Jack docked at the village less after that, choosing to sell his fish elsewhere. Once in a while, however, Jack would come back and share a meal with Mary's parents, where they would talk about nothing in particular. Jack would then leave and go to where the little girl that he had met so long ago was buried. The girl who showed him that whatever happens in life, everyone can choose how they see the world. The girl who showed him light in a world where there was none. The girl who, however briefly, gave him purpose. The girl he would never forget. He would visit her and tell her about the ocean.